Got this recording, that's recording. Andy, we are up. Thanks for being here. How's it going, man?
How you doing?
Doing good, man. And so one thing, when I read your stuff and your biography, whatever you want to say, you were it seemed like you had a very interesting background. And just so everyone kind of knows what we're going to get into here, you've written for Rolling Stone, ESPN, Forbes. You've interviewed a bunch of different rock stars and it seems like celebrity sports stars and everything. Just maybe we should just start, like, what was the motivation? Was this something you always had planned as a kid to start doing and just fall in your lap, or what's up?
No, you forgot the part about me working at a cubicle and in the business world for 20 years. But yeah, kind of like, I've always written a little bit, but I was, not a great student. I wasn't really kind of coherent about or consistent about my practices. I like to write and express myself, but I was not Dear Diary, writing in journal. It was just like in the 80s when you had to pick up a pen and do that. It was a little bit too much work. I actually learned how to use a computer. Like, we had typing classes in the 8th grade in like 1980, 85 or whatever it was. And so, I always kind of wrote a little bit, wrote for my elementary school newspaper. I think the first thing I ever wrote at all or about sports was I want to say it was like the winter of 1982, because I think the Bengals and 49ers were in the Super Bowl. It snowed a lot, and then my 4th grade class was overcome with this huge chess craze. So my first sports article was about the chess craze of Blair Mill Elementary in Pennsylvania, that because I was super into it too.
Sure.
And then, from there, just like a little bit of high school newspaper, a little bit of college newspaper. We didn't have blogs back then, so it wasn't as easy to do, I think, now. I mean, it's easier to get distracted now, I think, but it's easier to actually pen down your thoughts. And obviously going far in the other direction, we know that, people will talk about how many times they sneezed on TikTok today and, whatever else they think is interesting. And so, obviously we're in a different era completely, but I just kind of wrote along the way and always had thoughts. And, I got out of college, and I guess I intended to major in journalism when I got there, but I switched colleges and it just kind of went a different direction. So I had, in the 90s, I got out of college in 1994, worked in the business world for a while, worked in financial services. And I sold everything from originally I was working for a bank, and then I, sold stocks and bonds and mutual funds and currencies, and dabbled in IT for a while, and then got back to sales. And along the way, I did kind of 90s things. When it was cool to have, I don't know if you know what a zine is, but I had a zine. A zine was in the 90s where you and your friends kind of publish your own newspaper. Okay. Sort of prelude to a blog. We actually had a local printer that had newspaper paper, and we'd write about bands and get into shows for free and review albums and stuff like that. That was what zines were about. Tower Records used to have a whole wing of their huge magazine section that was dedicated to zines. A lot of it was punk rock type of zines. Obviously, there weren't zines about golf, I don't think, or conservative politics necessarily. So it was pretty much the punk scene and the indie rock scene. So we did that, and did that for a while. And then around 2000, when people started putting up their own websites, so it wasn't that hard to do that. I bought Dreamweaver in a box and put up my own music website, and then kind of fast forward to 2007, 2008. I'm working for an insurance company, kind of doing sales again, and just trying to stay sane. I was a young parent. I had a 2-year-old at the time, and a friend of mine suggested you should write a blog. So I just kind of went with that and would do a rant about sports once or twice a week and get my 8 friends at home to read it. And then just from there, set some goals maybe I can get published in the next 5 years, or let's see where this goes. And, one thing I'll say about the business world, even if you're not a businessy type of person, you do learn certain skills, things that you think only matter in that realm, like following up, and things that help you pitch an editor and not feel beat down when they say no. So I just kind of used that and came up with ideas and made connections, and eventually found my way to writing my first ESPN article about extreme sports in July of 2011, and just kind of hopped from opportunity to opportunity from there, and never took no for an answer, never decided that I only wanted to write about pro sports, or I only wanted to write about the NFL. If there was, I don't know, squirrel log tossing on ESPN, I would write about it, just kind of get something in ESPN, treat it like it was the most interesting thing in the world. And, I could tell you the story, but from there, just I ended up here kind of, interviewing athletes that some you've never heard of before, but then I've got to interview some big names like Tom Brady and Shaq and Billie Jean King, and just kind of built up, maybe not, I don't think I have a lot of followers or a huge audience, but kind of a reputation with sort of the publicists in the sports business space. And I've gotten to do a lot of cool things because of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, based on what you just said, that's a very interesting story. You kind of seems like you kind of saw the patterns of things. You started small, kind of worked your way up, and you just took a chance on things. And that's very bold. It's a very bold move. So, like you said, you were working in insurance for a while, then you decided to go ahead and just try this blog thing and the zine thing all at the same time. But it's one of those things that where people are, I feel like, are afraid to take those chances, where that's like, no, I'll just stay on the safe road. And, if I do take this chance, like, who's only going to read it? It's just my 8 friends. It's like you said. I mean, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe it's just a waste of time. Maybe the juice is not worth the squeeze, but it seems like you just said, nah, fuck that. I want to do what I want to do.
Yeah, I think, well, one cool thing about, you hear and read a lot about the gig economy, and it's sort of framed, like, I love business news, and I like to, I watch CNBC and I read Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal. They all kind of frame the gig economy sometimes, probably 95% of the time. It's like, well, it's this, you can make money, side hustles, but, unless you're a millionaire, you don't get benefits, you don't get support. But, at the same time, you can work, for a bank and then blog or do a podcast on the side. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to make a ton of money when you do it. But, at the same time, you can go different ways. And you do it because you love it. I would say about a writer, people ask me about, like, well, how did you switch to become a full-time writer? Isn't that hard? Did you have to starve? And what I would say is, writing is like being a video gamer. Like, I think probably no one in the world who plays video games did it because they heard that some esports person is making $10 million playing esports. Like, you do video games because you love it, because you can't stop playing. And then if it goes in that direction, or you build up a skill or repertoire, then it can go to a whole nother level. But you didn't start it because, you wanted to, I don't know, you thought about the monetary aspect, the career aspect. You just do it because you love it. So I think writing is the same way. Sports writing. I've told, young people that I talk to, who ask me about, like, how'd you do this, or how could I do this? And I just tell them, like, do it because you're passionate, and don't get hung up on, after my first article, I didn't get a full-time job offer from ESPN or Fox Sports. Like, it shouldn't be about that. Make it about what you love and do it anyway. And then good things happen down the road.
Yeah, that was a point I wanted to bring up, that, you seemed to even like doing what you loved. You were doing things that were maybe, if you want to say, outside the social norm. I mean, write about punk rock bands, or would you say that you would have wrote about squirrel log tossing or something, that where most people were like, no, I need to write about, the 1996 Bulls or whatever, just because that was what was happening. But you say true to your interests, and like you said, you got to carry or interview some big names now just because of that.
Yeah, or I mean, you can, I live in Chicago here, so I mean, you can make the goal and say, I want to be, I want to write about the Cubs, and whether that's you're a beat writer for MLB, or you're writing for the local newspaper, or Baseball America or whatever. Like, do that, but then don't also say, well, I'm not going to write about Little League baseball. That's beneath me, or I'm not going to cover this. Like, take your opportunities and use it as a means to an end, but enjoy the process, and be honest along the way. That's just my take on it. It's you don't see any. I write a little bit about sport, race car driving, and one thing I've learned about NASCAR is how, and just race car driving in general, like how entrepreneurial it is. And if you're a race car driver, you don't say, "Oh, I only want to race in the NASCAR Cup Series, and I only want to race for a big team like Hendricks or Joe Gibbs Racing." No, you got to start small, and you got to kind of take your opportunities where you can. And if that means racing the fourth tier race out in Idaho or Central Iowa to kind of get your wheels broken in, that's what you have to do. If the passion is, your love is really race car driving, and your end goal is to make it all the way, like, you got to do those things. That you need to go down that path. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder that, and I don't want, I'm generally speaking, of course, that if that's a problem with the modern world, I guess what to say, or younger generations, is that they think they have to go out and, catch a whale every time in order, if they're starting, whether it be esports or writing about the Cubs, like you said, but you got to start somewhere. You got to start small, and not everybody gets that chance to go out and interview Tom Brady or Shaquille O'Neal right out the gate, right? Then you got to work your way to it. But when they don't get, what am I trying to say? When they don't get that the very first time, they instantly just say, well, this is not for me. I'll just go ahead and find something else better to do rather than try to work at it and stay interested in it. I mean, is that kind of what the issue is? Like, it's like almost like a victim mentality that, it's woe is me, I guess, kind of thing.
It could be. I'm not very empathetic to people who feel sorry for themselves. Like I'm not saying I'm great or anything, but I came to Chicago in 1994. Between 94 and, probably 2016 or 17, like I didn't have, we used to say the word Rolodex. I didn't have a Rolodex of, important contacts. I didn't have any ins. I didn't have, and not that, I think very few people have like a family connection, but like if you're thinking that, you need to have like some sort of help, you need someone kind of put a good word for you. You're focusing on the wrong thing. So I think any pursuit, you got to do it because you love it and not be hung up on sort of what everyone else is doing. It kind of gets the old story in the 90s was, like I heard this statistic a couple of times, kind of changing subjects here, but on any given day in LA, 96% of the actors and actresses are out of work. Now, I don't know if that the ones who are working, the 4% includes the people who are sitting, in the crowd of an infomercial getting paid $50 to be there, or if we're talking like people have series. But the point is, like, you go out to LA because you want to be a movie writer, script writer, you work on your scripts, but that doesn't mean you can't work for UPS or serve coffee at a restaurant. Like in my generation, we were kind of told that, well, you're never going to make as much money as your parents. If you try to do something creative, like be a screenwriter or a sports writer or, a musician, you're going to end up, working in the mailroom of some crappy company. And that's all you're going to like. Whereas I think a lot of people my generation, I'm 50, Gen Xers like, well, screw it. Some of it was like, it was kind of cool in the 90s to be a hipster who worked at the UPS and, like had your own brown uniform. And then after your shift, you're going drinking, I don't know, the whiskey that no one else is drinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool right now that you never heard of in some Brooklyn bar. But, along the way, I guess maybe I feel like my generation, and maybe I'm speaking of people that I know interact with, like work is a means to an end. I know plenty of people who like are my age or close to who still bartend and still serve at restaurants. And like, that was another thing I was told, like, well, if you don't take school seriously, you're going to be waiting tables for the rest of your life. But I know people like who love interacting with customers and they don't want to get out of bed before 10 a.m. And they like working a 1 to 11 shift, and that's their life. And it's very social, and they could never work behind a desk, writing like I am or doing data entry. It's work is what you make it. And I think your opportunities are what you make it. And there's nothing, no rule, no substantive rule that says, you can't be a teacher in fourth grade and then also aspire to be an NHL coach, down the road. Like, give what you'll have a chance and keep being positive, I think.
Yeah, I can relate a lot to that I grew up in the in the 90s and 2000s was like my years. I'm 36. So, but I remember growing up and going to high school that if you were to say that, hey, to your guidance counselor or teacher or whatever, that, hey, I want to play in the NFL one day or whatever, you were just like, what? What? You're not going to do that. Get your degree, go to college and take the safe road out and, go, I don't know, go run a business or whatever it is. But, and my point is that on Joe Rogan's podcast, Aaron Rodgers actually had the same story too, that where he told his teacher or guidance counselor, whatever it was, that, hey, I'm going to be an NFL quarterback. And they just laughed in his face about it. And they almost just shut his dreams down just because of like, oh, it's like the old story. Well, what 1% of people actually make it to a professional athlete or whatever the statistic is. But it was like, damn, it can be done. But it was people like that who decide to like kind of just rain on your parade and crush your dreams at a young age. It's just like, what the hell, man? I mean, and when that there's a chance that anybody can do it, it's just a matter of maybe hard work and a little bit of luck at the same time,
Yeah. And, there's, I listen to a lot of, I'm huge into music, and that's part of what my book, 90 Days in the 90s is about. So sometimes I like to pretend in my mind, like I'm like one of my favorite bands when they're just playing small clubs. Cause like, I'm trying to get my book known in Chicago, but not, like I get to interview great people, but it's not like, I'm not like well known as a sports writer, but at the same time, like just have fun doing what you do and don't listen to what people say. And like I said, good things can happen. So yeah, there's a million paths to the end game. And I think it's just, you got to do what you love.
So
Otherwise, I mean, some people just see their job as a 9 to 5, and they just want to make enough money to kind of hang out with their family and their kids, and watch TV, and that's fine too. I'm not criticizing that, but I think life is boring when you just kind of don't aspire to do what you want, whether it's whether we're talking recreational, professional stuff. It's just you gotta enjoy life.
oh, I agree 100%. Who's your favorite band that you're writing about in your book that you were just saying?
Favorite band?
Is that what you just said? You're writing about your favorite band with your book?
Yeah, I've got about 50 of them. So
Okay. Or you just put an all conclusive kind of thing all together with them?
Yeah, so my book 90 Days in the 90s is primarily about a woman who's about my age. She's a record store owner, and she moved back to Chicago. So you see the poster behind me. There's what looks like a train car. That's remnant. We have something called the L here in Chicago, where you got different lines. Not as big as like New York, but if you ever been to Chicago, if you take the train, the red line goes north and south, the blue line goes to the airport, and there's the brown line and the orange line, yada yada. So she hears these urban legends about this train called the Gray Line that supposedly, if you can find it, goes back to the past, and she doesn't really believe it at first. But taking the whole urban legends as a 90s theme, I kind of play with that. And long story short, she finds a Gray Line stop under her record store and decides to go back to the 90s to just kind of reboot her life and redo some things. And then when she's back in the 90s, she gets way too caught up in the Chicago music scene and enjoying life and hanging out with her friends and going to see bands play live shows. And she inadvertently gets her job as a music writer back. And when that happens, when you're talking about the music scene in any city, talk with a music nut, and not that they're name dropping bands, but you're going to talk about all kinds of bands and all kinds of just like you talk about fantasy football, you're going to talk with somebody for 15 minutes about football, you're going to hear a million bazillion names of players and coaches and stuff. So I love music from Chicago. I love music from England. I mean, there's some of my favorite bands are from LA too, and quite a few good bands from Virginia, especially in the mid 90s alternative scene, which I could talk about if you want. But
yeah,
it's there's a little bit of sports folklore in my book, and of course, it's right in the middle of when Jordan comes back to the Bulls.
Nice.
And the Bulls dominate the world, and back in the 90s, if you see The Last Dance, you might get an inkling on this, but we literally would stop 3 times a week, whatever we were doing, to watch the Chicago Bulls play.
Sure.
It was because
it was my thing. I was little. Yeah, I was 10 years old, and I was like, oh,
yeah.
Bulls,
so all that
tipping.
Yeah, all that is in the book. All that's in the book, and it's just kind of someone's I guess personal journey, but a hell of a lot of Chicago music and sports thrown into it.
Yeah, I mean, so you just decided just to wrap everything up and say, I'm going to write. Is this your first book? It's I'm
Yep.
writing. Yeah. What's been the writing process been like? I mean, is it something you write every day, or you just only write when you get inspired, or what?
I think I think some people who maybe aren't professional writers, or even people who are writers, aspirers, I think that you need to be inspired, so to speak. But I think you really need to apply yourself. But more than anything, I think. So I spent 5 years writing this book, and people might go, "Wow, 5 years, that's a lot." Ooh, that seems like that's tough. I was really into the subject. I just came up with an idea one day about, wouldn't it be cool to time travel back to the 90s to see this band that I liked, or to visit this taco shop that I love that's no longer in Chicago because it shut down, 25 years ago. Stuff like that. I get excited about places to go and places to eat, and it's kind of like everyday things like that. So I didn't know it was going to take me 5 years. It's not like I said, 5 years from now, I'm going to have a book, but started writing it in the middle of 2017, just trying to figure it out. And I like the subject and the idea enough, and the idea of putting Chicago and music in it enough, that I ended up, I just kind of figured this out about a month ago. I ended up creating this alternate reality in the 90s with these cool characters I wanted to hang out with. And that was how I got through writing 2 hours a day, every day.
Nice.
To get it done. And it made it easier than I thought it would be. But
so what do you mean? You were just kind of imagining these characters that you wanted to hang out with all day, and you just started writing? Is that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I knew there was going to be a music piece to it. So when you're writing a novel or any sort of fiction, you got to kind of figure out you who's your character, what do they get, excited and bummed out about? Why are they doing what they're doing? So you kind of figure out those things out. If you got to kind of keep writing in the beginning, but you figure some of those things out. And then, she has a record store. So there's probably going to be some people who are arguing about bands, just like if you're in your fantasy football league, there's probably going to be people arguing about whether your quarterback is better than mine. And, that's kind of like natural everyday stuff. And I just played with that and built on it. And so that's what I mean. Like I would, you got to create scenes in a story. And then I would think of things like, wow, I think about like my friends who are really into music who would argue about the most insane things because music is their life. And, how many times I was present for those like silly little discussions and kind of made, kind of took some of that and put my place as like, as a narrator, a bystander watching all this stuff. And I can talk about 90s movies, but there's a piece to it too, where I felt like, kind of like in Pulp Fiction, when you're hanging out with Jules and Vincent on the stakeout in the morning, like I've never been a gangster, but I kind of felt like I'm hanging out with them in that movie. Like there's a lot of 90s movies that are like that. So I kind of aimed for that angle, just to be like, you're reading this book and you're rolling with Darby and her friends in the 90s and some funny shit happens. And, hopefully you dig into it as much as they do.
Yeah. I mean, I love, I don't know how many 90s movies I can just start naming off the top of my head, but I kind of agree though that, that was a lot of my childhood growing up was movies just because I grew up in a very rural area and like literally my best friends were miles away. And that, yeah, then there was nothing really else to do besides, the closest park was, a couple miles away and it's hard to get in rides or everything. So watching movies was like my thing. It still is. That's kind of what I grew up in still doing now that, give me some popcorn and a cherry Coke and I'll watch movies all day long. It's just my thing. And just that you find those movies, like you said, that you're like almost envisioning yourself within that scene or whatever it is. And that it's really cool feeling. Then you can go on and talk about it, and like whatever it is, let's talk about like these insane arguments. It's like you said that, your friends used to have about the most ridiculous things ever about, what was really in the briefcase or not. What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you. So one of the pivotal movies in the 90s that to me is Days Confused. Have you ever seen Days Confused?
Matthew McConaughey? Yeah.
All right. So that there's not really a plot. And basically you hang out with these kids from Austin, Texas on the last day of their junior year of high school for basically 24 hours.
Sure.
And it happens over the span of a day. And yeah, there's some things that happen. I mean, there is a plot. I can't say there's no plot, but it's not, explosion in the first scene. And it's not like Die Hard where all of a sudden there's a problem that needs to be resolved. Like, I don't even know if there's a problem that needs to be resolved in that movie, but it just works because the dialogue is great and it kind of sets the tone for what it is. And I think now it's a classic. And also it's great that all these people who were nobodies back then, like Matthew McConaughey, Ben Affleck, in indie music, Parker Posey is, indie movies, like Parker Posey is, one of the best actresses out there. Joey Lauren Adams. There's probably a whole bunch of them I'm missing that were in that movie. And it kind of works out that this movie that was such an enjoyable thing in the 90s became more important as time went on and speaks to maybe the feeling of the 90s. And I kind of wanted to capture that in my book, or at least I hope I did. And I think some people who have read it so far have told me that, it's in the right ballpark.
Do you think it's a lot of nostalgia? Because when, we start talking about, movies like this or music, for example, I did a CrossFit competition in Bristol a few weeks ago. And I think sometime this month, the Wallflowers are going to be playing down there. And I was like, oh shit, I remember watching their videos, when I was growing up, and it was such like a cool feeling, just even though they were still playing, I had no clue that like, it was the first time I even thought about them in years. So do you think that's like a lot of it, just that nostalgia feeling that people get that feelings back and they want to go explore it and see how they feel now compared to what they did back when they really first saw it?
Yeah.
Anything? Ready?
I think so. I mean, I know Jacob Dylan's been doing some stuff. Like I only really like maybe one or two of the Wallflower songs, but like I love that song Fifth Avenue Heartbreak. The other stuff is, it's not really my flavor, but he did that movie that he did a documentary about a year and a half ago called Echo in the Valley, where he kind of like revisits the bands in what is that area in LA, the Laurel Canyon area, and like how bands from the late 60s, early 70s, like Crosby, Stills and Nash, influenced the rock of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So, obviously he's very active in music. I've been going to concerts a lot, so I will say yes. I mean, it depends what kind of music you're into, but I think nowadays bands, especially bands that have been around for a while, like they don't make their money on selling records, they make it on touring. So I just saw, for example, last Saturday, I saw L7, a great band that first got kind of heard about in the 90s, all-woman band. And they were great. I saw Echo and the Bunnymen, like a late 80s band about a month ago here in Chicago. Of course, everybody in the crowd was my age. And I took my son, and my son wanted to see Dinosaur Jr. He's 16. So a couple of Fridays ago, we went out, and it was like, it was like a lot of dads with 16-year-olds or 18-year-olds. And, they're kind of doing their thing again, and they popped out of the early 90s as well. So I think so. And maybe you could be cynical about it, say it's a business thing. Of course, the 90s are going to come back because record companies have records to sell, and people are opportunistic. But I do think that, yeah, people will, Drake will have a comeback in 15 or 20 years. I don't like Drake. I think his music kind of sucks. That's just my opinion. But, like Eminem's still around. He's still kind of doing new things, and he's not going to go away. There's always going to be people who will pay $65 to sit in a stadium and see him, and he's one of those. Eminem's one of those artists who could probably like play 5 shows back to back in a stadium. Sure. Whereas a lot of what I'm seeing now, and this is the other side of it, that, like Boy George and Culture Club could come in the US, and there'll be people who are, like 10 years older than me, and maybe some people my age, who will go see them at the Chicago Theater or a club that holds, 400 people, because they're like, yeah, I love their music. That's nostalgia is a big business, but it's also it's part of our lives too, I think.
Well, look at Blink 182. They just announced they were doing another reunion.
Yeah, exactly.
I was trying to get tickets in Charlotte, and ticket prices were insane already just out the gate. And that was me sitting with my probably head would be touching the ceiling. They were going to be like $300 or $400. And I was like, damn, I really want to see them, but I can't. I don't know if I can justify this right now. But I get it that everyone just wants to jump back on the board just because of like they're back, just I got to relive my days.
Yeah, maybe they never went away. I did basically the same thing twice with Guns N' Roses. I saw them at Wrigley a year ago, and then I saw them in the nosebleeds at the United Center in 2017. And like I follow them on Instagram, and like this week they're playing like Santiago, Chile, and Buenos Aires, and the stadiums are not any smaller there. They're keeping busy. They're not releasing new records that I know of, but there's people still want to hear "Welcome to the Jungle," and they always will. Even when Axl Rose is in a walker wearing his leather pants, people are going to still pay top dollar to see these guys if they can.
Well, yeah, there's been a bunch of people like that. Wasn't Johnny Cash one of those guys who they would still get out there and just push him out there and just hope that he could play or do something until he just kicked the bucket finally? Like Richard Pryor with his comedy, they did the same thing with him, just kind of willing him out. And because I knew people would still come see him, but were they in the best? Was it their best performances? Probably not.
I don't know. I mean, Johnny Cash did an interesting thing where he did a covers album, which I mentioned in my book. I don't remember. It's like a combination where he does like this. He does songs by Soundgarden and Depeche Mode, and you've heard them all. Yep. And he kind of like honored and kind of gave it up for the music of the '90s in the '90s, and people were like, wow, this is pretty cool. And oh, by the way, like people don't like country, like old country. They like old Johnny Cash. They like George Jones in like the late 50s, early 60s, when he basically singing about making moonshine, and that's about it. When he had short hair, great stuff. Richard Pryor, I don't know. I mean, I think so. I guess it's what we're getting at here is sometime soon Eddie Murphy's going to have a huge ass tour where he's on stage, maybe doing some greatest hits, probably being Eddie Murphy. I'm sure he's maybe gotten a little bored making successful movies and winning Oscars, and he's a stand-up by nature. So I would hope that he's going to come out there at some point soon. And you and I are going to be, gullible enough to pay $250 to see Eddie Murphy do Eddie Murphy live. Because if James Brown was alive, I would go pay a couple $100 to see James Brown beat James Brown on stage. So there's I think it's natural in American Western culture to kind of, rock and roll was kind of pitched as this thing that was going to go away. And then I think when I was growing up in the 80s and Springsteen was big, and, people were like, no one's really going to care about Springsteen and in the 90s and beyond. But, he played at the Walter Care Theater 4 nights a week in New York for like 2 years. And I remember, I think the first time I went to New York with my wife and kid, my kid is like, we should go see Springsteen. I'm like, dude, you got $1,500? Because I don't. But a lot of people are paying to see him. And what is he? He's doing a podcast with Obama now.
Yeah, I've heard that, man.
So
I've heard it fresh though.
Springsteen's still relevant, whether or not you like Born in the USA or Thunder Road or whatever. Like, he's doing stuff, and that's pretty cool. So let's hooray for nostalgia and hooray for people still having good taste for stuff that's been around for a while.
Yeah, you touched on this earlier that when we were talking about those stupid little arguments that your friends like to have, and you just talked about like modern country versus old country, and then I've had people like, oh, that's not country today, it's pop or whatever, and just and I really kind of avoid these arguments because I try to see both sides of it, but it's like, well, I mean, I don't really have a dog in the fight anyway, but yeah, but I tend to get in the middle a bunch of these little arguments like that, especially like the LeBron versus Michael, who's the GOAT and all this, or Kobe's, you can put him in there too. And it's just like, all right, we can sit here and argue this all day, but
Yeah, I'm not. I have one of my best friends. She's a college professor. She loves like all she listens to is country music, and she's definitely not someone who like is from kind of rural white conservative America. She's Chicago suburbs here, and I could like she'll tell you that Little Big Town is country, but they're also pretty pop. They sound a lot like Fleetwood Mac, and they kind of look like Fleetwood Mac a little bit.
sure.
But they're selling out stadiums. People love their music. That's kind of all that matters. So yeah, and if I don't like Drake, who cares what I say? Drake is still. I'll always think of him as like a Mouseketeer on the Disney Channel, but he's selling a lot of records, selling a lot of tickets to concerts when he tours. So
Yeah.
more power to him.
What was it like? You seemed like you're always trying to get into concert and stuff, but during COVID, what was it like? Did you just have to just sit back and just, well, this is how it's going to be and just adapt?
Yeah, I had gone. I think in the summer. I know I went to Riot Fest that summer in 2019, and I'd seen a show or two, and so it's kind of like I tend to do this thing where I'll see a couple of concerts or club shows in a row, and then I'm good for 8 months. So it kind of worked out. I did actually like. You probably heard that some bands were having like their little tiny desk concerts or like concerts in the basement. I watched a concert. Dressy Bessie is a band from Denver. They're kind of like alternative pop. They're kind of fun, not really heavy music. And I watched them like basically the two people. I think it might even be a husband and wife, or the two main people in the band, like in their basement with like a strobe light, just playing their songs. And another one of my favorite Southern rock bands, Dash Up Rock. They're from New Orleans. They've been around forever. They did like a crawfish boil and played a concert. So like they're like standing 10 or 15 feet apart, and literally there's like a big ass pot that's, I don't know, it's probably like the size of a garbage can with steam going in the background because they're getting ready to boil crawfish at the end of their set. And I think I was coming back from like, I had to do errands. I think my wife sent me on errands. I was like, crap, Dash Up Rock is on. I'm literally walking out of the car on my phone, like, oh, my phone's good enough that I could actually watch this and watch their set, walk to my house and sat down. This is probably like 4 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. So I did, as much of that as I could. I saw Juliana Hatfield play a live set. I'm not sure if she still lives in Boston, but she did kind of her acoustic thing.
Yeah.
Acoustic pouty face, singing sappy, like sappy, like songs about someone who's depressed and the songs still rock. Like a lot of the artists did what they had to. And, yeah, so I mean, I feel like it was obviously a time in recent history that was unique, and obviously you couldn't do anything about it other than just try to be safe. So, yeah, I got my fill. Kind of gave well, I guess the difference between the world now and back then is everybody uses Zoom. But maybe the musicians got out the program and said we're going to play a live set on Zoom or Skype or whatever, and that's not abnormal now. And I'm going to go to live concerts. I'm not going to watch Guns N' Roses play, over Zoom, unless that's the only option. But yeah, for a while it worked. I think it kept us sane for a little while, and it is what it is. So what about you? What did you do when you were locked in?
Well, I mean, honestly, life did not change much for me during COVID. It just really, for me, just go wear a mask if I went outside.
Yeah.
So I still had access to a gym. I still went to work. I still went to the grocery store. Not much was really closed down in my area, but of course, like I'm from a very rural area. So, but for me, going out, just it's more just like, hey, you just want to bring over some friends and do anything, and then we'll watch either movies or just whatever. If we could find somebody like I know a couple of comedians did that Zoom thing, and
yeah,
it was just different, like being at a concert, like you said, being at a concert and watching it through Zoom, it's just a different experience. It's just like, yeah, this is cool and all, but if I was actually at the concert, I would really be just having the time of my life, so to speak. But
yeah. I had friends who got married and they had a really small part, like literally immediate family, and then a couple of, like a bridal party. It was pretty, and we watched their wedding on Zoom. This was in the fall of 2020. So then when eventually I saw them in person, like this summer or this spring, it was, we knocked back a couple of beers to kind of make up for the time away. So
no, it was March, I think, of 20. And a bunch of my friends and I went up to Roanoke, which was, they got a bunch of breweries and stuff up there. And that's when kind of COVID was, I think it was still in China or something. It was maybe one case had just gotten in Seattle or wherever it was at right now. And we were just like, whatever, we're just going to go. No, we weren't taking it serious. We thought it was going to be everything just like all the other, like swine flu and everything else, like it'll just die out, whatever. But we went up there, nothing bad happened or whatever. But I remember like the next week or 2 weeks later, it was all of a sudden the world started shutting down.
Yeah.
I was like, oh shit, maybe we shouldn't have went up there.
Well, I remember like going out with my wife and a little early, which we tend to do this in Chicago for St. Patrick's Day. And I think it was like, we're going to go out tonight and we're going to have to like probably not go out. Back then it was, no one was wearing masks. It was more like, I'm not going to shake your hand or hug you. I'll give you a fist bump, and we'll be fine. Little did we know, probably about a week and a half. I want to say it was during St. Patrick's Day. I remember it was a Wednesday and my kid was supposed to have spring break starting that Friday. And the Wednesday, just like they literally sent everybody home, be like, all right, you got an extra day. And then Chicago went, what do they call it, to shelter in place, and we started not going anywhere. And then you wonder if can you order food, groceries, and we were just super careful and followed the mandates and did what we had to do, but saw it through eventually. And I'm glad nobody immediately related to me or that I'm close with got really sick. I mean, so maybe did something right, just being careful.
No, I'm the same way. I have one friend who really put him down, but other than that, it was just, like he just said it was a really bad flu, basically. But no one really had any other bad experiences other than that. So, like you said, pretty grateful for that. But and that might be, I guess, a double-edged sword because I don't know if I actually took it that serious or not. Because it's like, whatever, if I get it, I'll be fine. I ain't worried about it. But and I'm not saying that to offend anybody or whatever, because I know some people had a lot of issues with it, but. Yeah, that was just, my take on it, that it's kind of like, whatever, I'll be okay. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, we made it through. So
exactly. So, but Andy, I want to be respectful of your time. I know I only got you for a little bit. So, but if people want to find the book, or if you want to plug the book or plug where people can find the book, all that good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to if you're on it, everybody's getting it through Amazon these days, 90 Days in the 90s, pretty easy to find. That's one of the cool parts about Amazon. Once your book's on Amazon, it like takes care of the SEO part of it. I went literally from like one day can't even find my own new website for the book to like, there it is. It's all over the place. So or wherever you buy books, I definitely do encourage if you got like a local bookstore. And I've actually got my book at some record stores, like, patronize local businesses, sure. Even if you order it, if that's something that you want to do, definitely support local businesses. Otherwise, you go to my website, just 90daysin90s.com. If you order it from there, I'll ship it, sign it for you, send you some swag. But yeah, I mean, if you like 90s music at all, or you like a different spin on time travel fiction with a lot of pop culture in it, I think that's what the book is about. So yeah, it's out there, and take a crack at it.
Cool. Well, thanks for being here, dude. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
See you folks. We're out of here.